He tried to ruin my reputation, make everyone think I was a liar and a gold digger. But now, ironically, I'm the one writing his checks. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never imagined that the person I loved and trusted the most could turn against me so completely. My name is Madison Carter, and for as long as I can remember, I've always believed in working hard and treating people with kindness. I've never been the type to ask for handouts or rely on anyone for my happiness. That's why it hurt even more when I realized that Ethan Reynolds, the man I thought I could spend my life with, had been quietly undermining me behind my back. Ethan was charming, smooth, and knew exactly what to say to make people like him. On the surface, he seemed perfect, the kind of man everyone would want to have in their lives. I fell for him completely, trusting that he felt the same way about me. I never saw the cracks beneath the surface until they were impossible to ignore. It all started with little things that didn't add up. I would hear whispers from coworkers, subtle looks from friends, and even comments from family members that made me pause. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe people were just mistaken or misunderstood something. But the truth hit me one evening when a close friend confronted me with what Ethan had been saying. He painted me as someone who only cared about money, who was using him, who had no real intentions but to profit off our relationship. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. The betrayal stung more than anything I had ever experienced, because it didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone I loved and trusted completely. I couldn't believe that all the moments we shared, all the plans we made, and all the trust one had given him could be twisted into lies so easily. The humiliation of knowing that people I cared about had been misled was unbearable. I spent hours replaying our conversations, trying to figure out where I went wrong, only to realize that it wasn't me at fault. It was Ethan. He had carefully constructed this false image of me, knowing it would hurt me, knowing it would isolate me. Even though my heart ached and my mind was spinning with anger and confusion, a part of me knew I couldn't just let this go. I needed to think, to plan, to find a way to take control of the situation without letting him see my pain. I didn't want revenge out of cruelty. I wanted justice, a way to reclaim my dignity and prove that I was stronger than the lies he spread. Little did Ethan know, every lie he told was planting the seeds of his own downfall. From that moment on, I decided I wouldn't be a victim. I would find a way to turn the tables, to show him that the person he underestimated could rise above the betrayal. And though it felt impossible at first, I could feel a quiet determination growing inside me, a determination that would change everything between us. When I think back to the early days with Ethan, it's hard to believe how blind I was. I trusted him completely, believed in him when he struggled with his small business, and even lent him money when he said he needed it to keep things afloat. I never hesitated because I loved him and thought supporting him was the right thing to do. I never imagined he would turn that trust into another weapon against me. Behind my back, Ethan was telling everyone that I had taken his money for myself, that I was only in the relationship to benefit financially. Hearing those words, even from secondhand sources, felt like a punch to the gut. The man I cared about, the one I had stood by in his toughest moments, was twisting reality to make me look like the villain. I couldn't understand how someone could be so cold and calculated, taking the love and trust one gave him and using it to destroy me. During that time, I leaned heavily on the people who truly cared for me. My best friend Lily was my rock. She listened without judgment, held me when I cried, and reminded me that I wasn't the person Ethan said I was. She encouraged me to stay strong and think carefully about my next steps. My brother, Tom, was another pillar of support. He was furious on my behalf, telling me I didn't deserve this and that Ethan's lies wouldn't define who I was. Their support was comforting, but it didn't erase the pain of knowing how deeply Ethan had betrayed me. Things only got worse when I realized his lies weren't just personal. They were affecting my professional life. I noticed subtle changes at work. Colleagues who once trusted me hesitating, whispers I could overhear in the hallways, and a few people avoiding me altogether. Ethan had managed to turn my own community against me without them ever knowing the truth. The combination of heartbreak, humiliation, and fear was almost unbearable. I remember one day sitting alone in my apartment, feeling the weight of it all, and thinking about everything I had sacrificed and given to him. The anger inside me grew with each memory of his deception. I was hurt, yes, but more than that, I was furious that someone I loved so much could be so manipulative and cruel. It was in that moment that I realized I couldn't just let him get away with this. I made a decision then and there. I wouldn't let Ethan walk over me, and I wouldn't let him destroy my life or reputation without consequences. I knew I had to be smart, patient, and deliberate. Revenge wasn't about hurting him blindly. It was about reclaiming my dignity, proving my worth, and showing him that betrayal would not define me. From that day forward, I promised myself I would take control of the situation, and I would not stop until I did. After everything Ethan had done, I knew I couldn't confront him directly. If I wanted to make things right, I had to be careful. I needed a plan that didn't make me look desperate or angry, even though inside I was both. So instead of reacting emotionally, I took my first quiet steps toward getting control back. I decided to learn more about his finances, his business, and any weak spots he might have. I wanted to understand the game before making my move. That's when I reached out to Greg, a financial advisor recommended by Tom. Greg was calm, intelligent, and completely straightforward. I told him I needed help, not with revenge, but with protecting myself and understanding my options. Without judging me, he listened to everything: Ethan's lies, the money I had given him, and the way he was using my reputation to make himself look better. Greg explained that there were legal ways to gain leverage, especially since I had financially supported Ethan during his business struggles. I still had proof of that help, and Ethan had left a paper trail wider than he realized. Greg walked me through documents I still had, bank transfers, messages, and agreements Ethan seemed to forget existed. With them, I could show I had invested in his business, not taken money from him like he claimed. Greg said it wouldn't just clear my name. It could also give me rights within the parts of his business I had helped fund. I wasn't sure how far I wanted to take things yet, but simply knowing I had options gave me a new sense of strength. Meanwhile, Ethan was doing exactly what men like him always do, acting like nothing was wrong. In fact, he seemed even louder than before. He bragged about new clients, new deals, and how successful he was becoming. He bought expensive clothes, went out to pricey restaurants, and walked around like someone who had everything under control. People who didn't know him well believed it. They thought he was winning. But those close to him could see the cracks, even if they didn't understand them. His confidence was too forced, his smile too wide. Every time I saw him showing off, it only made my resolve stronger. The arrogance, the way he celebrated his lies, it all pushed me to keep going. I stayed calm around him, never letting him see that I was planning anything. I acted polite, almost distant, so he wouldn't suspect a thing. While he was busy putting on a show for everyone, I was collecting information, learning how his business really worked, and figuring out exactly where he was vulnerable. The more I watched, the clearer it became that Ethan wasn't as stable as he pretended to be. And the best part was that he had no idea what I was doing behind the scenes. For the first time since everything happened, I felt like I had the upper hand. I wasn't ready to make a move yet, but I was getting closer, and he didn't even see it coming. Even as I carefully planned my next steps, a part of me couldn't stop questioning myself. Late at night, when everything was quiet, I would lie awake and wonder if I was becoming like him. Am I letting anger and revenge take over me? I asked myself. I didn't want to stoop to his level, but the thought of letting him get away with what he did made my blood boil. It was a constant battle between my conscience and my need for justice. The tension hit me hard at a family gathering one weekend. Ethan showed up, looking more confident than ever, laughing loudly and telling stories as if nothing had happened. He didn't know I was there, quietly standing in the corner, watching him charm relatives and friends. Every joke he told, every boast about his business successes, was like a knife twisting in my chest. He was enjoying himself, completely unaware of how carefully I had been watching him, how much I knew. It was humiliating, yes, but it also made me realize just how much power I could quietly gain if I played my cards right. I felt a mix of emotions, hurt, anger, and even a strange sense of admiration for his skill at pretending nothing was wrong. But just as quickly as those feelings came, I reminded myself that his confidence was a mask. I knew the cracks were there, and I just had to be patient. That night, I left the gathering with a renewed determination, telling myself I wouldn't let him win. When I finally called Lily and Tom afterward, I broke down a little. They didn't judge me or tell me to forget about him. Instead, they reminded me that I wasn't alone and that my feelings were valid. Lily told me, "You're stronger than him, Madison. Don't let him make you doubt that." Tom added, "You've already done everything right by staying calm. Just keep your focus, and he'll regret underestimating you." Their words were simple but powerful, grounding me when my thoughts threatened to spiral out of control. I realized I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to humiliate him publicly or act cruelly. What I wanted was for him to face the consequences of his actions, to understand that lies and manipulation wouldn't protect him forever. I wanted to turn the situation around legally, smartly, and with dignity. That night, I started imagining the outcome in my mind. I pictured a future where Ethan could no longer hurt me or control how others saw me. I imagined the moment when he would finally realize that all the arrogance, all the lies, and all the gloating couldn't shield him from the truth. That vision, more than anything, gave me the courage to keep going. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I also knew that every careful step I took now would lead to the justice I deserved. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a quiet sense of hope. As I dug deeper into Ethan's life, I started noticing things that didn't match the confident persona he showed everyone. One day, while reviewing some public records and financial documents with Greg, I discovered that he had taken out a large loan under his own name to cover business expenses he couldn't afford. It shocked me. All the wealth he flaunted, the fancy dinners, and new purchases were built on fragile ground. It was clear he was barely holding things together, and no one around him seemed to know. That moment felt like a turning point. I realized that with careful planning, I could use this weakness to my advantage. If I moved smartly, I could secure a legal stake in his ventures, the ones he had built on lies and borrowed money, without breaking any laws. Greg helped me understand exactly how to structure it so I wouldn't put myself at risk, but could still gain leverage. I wasn't doing this out of spite. I wanted justice, and I wanted to make sure Ethan couldn't continue using lies and arrogance to hurt others or ruin my reputation. Even as I planned all this behind the scenes, I had to stay calm around him. Publicly, I smiled, acted polite, and didn't give him the slightest hint that I knew anything about his shaky finances. Every encounter was a test of patience. I kept my emotions in check, laughed at his jokes, and let him think everything was still normal. Watching him strut around like he was untouchable, while knowing the truth, gave me a quiet satisfaction I couldn't admit to anyone at the same time. The tension inside me grew. Every step I took had to be precise, or it could backfire. What if he noticed what I was doing? What if he tried to cut me off before I had any leverage? Those thoughts made me anxious, but I reminded myself to stay patient. Revenge and justice weren't about rushing, they were about timing. Every document I gathered, every investment I prepared, brought me closer to a point where I could finally confront him without fear. I also started imagining the look on his face when he realized he had underestimated me. That thought fueled my determination. He had spent so long trying to make me feel powerless, thinking I couldn't fight back, that I didn't have the strength or intelligence to protect myself. He was wrong, and soon he would see that the very foundation he built his arrogance on could be turned against him. From that point on, every action I took was deliberate. I observed him, learned his habits, and quietly positioned myself in a way that gave me control. The risk of him discovering my plan made it more thrilling, but it also made me more careful. I couldn't afford mistakes. One wrong move could ruin everything. So I stayed calm, patient, and focused, knowing that each step brought me closer to the moment when justice would finally be mine. I finally began putting my plan into action, step by step. I started gathering every document I could find that proved my financial support for Ethan's business and any agreements he had signed, even if informally. Greg helped me organize everything, making sure I had a clear record of transactions and commitments that could later give me legal leverage. At the same time, I began reaching out quietly to potential partners and investors who could help me strengthen my position. Nothing was obvious to Ethan, but each connection I made was a step towards securing my control. I also started making small, strategic investments in areas that overlapped with his business. It wasn't about taking everything at once. It was about slowly positioning myself so that when the time came, I could act decisively. Every decision was calculated, every move intentional. I had to be patient and careful because one mistake could ruin everything I had worked for. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to act like nothing was wrong. His arrogance blinded him to the warning signs I was creating around him. He boasted about new deals and flashy clients, bragging to anyone who would listen about how smart and successful he was. At a recent gathering with his friends, he couldn't stop talking about the new investments he had made and how well he was doing financially. What he didn't realize was that he was showing me exactly where he was exposed. Every boast, every careless comment, gave me insight into his weaknesses and confirmed that my plan was on track. Watching him like that brought a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt satisfaction. I could see that the arrogance that had hurt me so deeply was leading him straight into the consequences he didn't even know were coming. I felt a quiet sense of control, a confirmation that my patience and planning were paying off. On the other hand, there was guilt. I had always been someone who tried to see the good in people, and even though Ethan had hurt me deeply, I couldn't help but feel conflicted about taking advantage of his blind spots. It was emotional and human, a reminder that even revenge doesn't come without cost. Despite the guilt, I reminded myself why I was doing this. Ethan had spent months trying to destroy my reputation and make me feel powerless. He had used my trust against me. Now, for the first time, I was in a position where I could protect myself and reclaim what was rightfully mine. Each small victory, each document I secured and each partnership I formed, brought me closer to the moment when I could finally level the playing field. By the time I left that gathering, I felt a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Ethan had no idea what was coming, and the thrill of knowing that the next steps were completely in my hands was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was finally turning the tables, and it felt like I was starting to win, not just for me, but for everything I had lost along the way. After months of careful planning, the breakthrough finally came. One of the contracts Ethan had signed years ago, the one I had quietly kept and organized, gave me a critical legal advantage. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof of my involvement and investment in his business, something he had completely overlooked in his arrogance. Greg helped me understand the full weight of it. I now had legitimate leverage that could shift control, and Ethan had no idea how vulnerable he really was. I could see the first cracks in his confident persona almost immediately. At a meeting with potential clients, I noticed him hesitate when a question about funding came up. His usual quick, charming answers faltered, and he avoided eye contact with me, as if sensing something he couldn't put his finger on. He tried to regain his composure, laughing off the awkward moment, but the tension was obvious. The once untouchable, cocky man everyone admired was showing stress, and it was satisfying to watch, even though part of me felt guilty for feeling this way. The emotional satisfaction of seeing him falter was intense. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to humiliate me had led to this moment where he was no longer untouchable. I reminded myself to stay calm and composed, because any sign that I was gloating could tip him off and ruin everything. Yet inside, a quiet sense of triumph was growing. All the patience, all the planning, all the emotional energy I had invested was finally paying off. As I watched him struggle, my mind kept returning to the bigger picture. This wasn't about hurting him for the sake of revenge. It was about justice. I kept repeating to myself, this isn't just revenge, it's justice. Every document, every strategic move, every patient step I had taken was about reclaiming what he had tried to take from me. My dignity, my reputation, and my power. I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences, and that arrogance built on lies can't last forever. Even as he continued to try to appear confident in front of others, his small gestures betrayed him. The way he tapped his pen nervously, the slight hesitation before answering questions, the forced smiles, all signs that he was starting to realize I was no longer powerless. It felt almost surreal to see the man who had caused me so much pain finally confronted with his own vulnerability. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely in control. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted me were replaced with a quiet determination. I was ready for the next steps, fully aware of the power I held and the consequences Ethan would face if he continued down the path he had set for himself. This turning point wasn't just a win. It was proof that patience, intelligence, and persistence could overcome even the most manipulative person. And deep down, I knew the best was yet to come. I arranged to meet Ethan at a small cafe, pretending it was just a casual catch-up. He arrived with his usual confident smile, unaware of how much I knew and how much control I now had over the situation. From the moment he sat down, I could feel the tension, though he didn't. He was still charming, still arrogant, still completely convinced he had the upper hand. That we started talking about normal things at first, business, mutual acquaintances, small talk, but I kept my tone calm and measured. Every word was deliberate. I let him speak more than I did, listening carefully, noting the little cracks in his composure, that had begun to show over the past weeks. He bragged a little, trying to make me feel small, trying to show that nothing had changed and that he was still in control. But I stayed silent, smiling politely, letting him fill the air with his own arrogance. Then, subtly, I began to steer the conversation toward the business matters he thought he had hidden from me. I asked questions about contracts, investments, and finances in a casual, almost innocent tone. At first, he answered confidently, but soon I noticed the hesitation, the slight pause before he spoke, and the flicker of realization in his eyes. He began to understand that I knew far more than he had ever imagined, that nothing about me had been random or unplanned. The moment was quiet but electric. Ethan tried to regain control, making jokes, laughing at himself, and attempting to deflect, but it didn't work. I could see it in the way his voice wavered, the way he avoided direct eye contact for more than a second. He realized he had underestimated me, and that realization was priceless. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was clear. I had been playing him all along, and now he was trapped by his own mistakes and overconfidence that I didn't need to shout or accuse him. I let the calm in my voice and the steady confidence in my eyes do the work. There was no screaming match, no public humiliation. The subtlety made it all the more satisfying. The power shift was undeniable. Ethan had spent so long trying to control me, manipulate me, and destroy my reputation. And now he could do nothing to stop the consequences he had unknowingly set in motion. As we finished our conversation and parted ways, I felt a mix of relief and quiet triumph. The confrontation wasn't about hurting him in the moment. It was about showing him that his arrogance and lies had limits. For the first time, he had no control, and I did. The weight of betrayal and heartbreak began to lift slightly, replaced with the knowledge that I had handled it with intelligence, patience, and calm strength. This was the moment where everything changed, and I knew the next steps would only cement the justice I had been working toward all along. After the cafe meeting, I finally moved on the final steps of my plan. With Greg's guidance and all the documents I had carefully collected, I legally forced Ethan to repay the debts he owed me from the financial support I had given him. I also secured a stake in his business ventures, making sure everything was above board and completely legal. It wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense. It was about holding him accountable for the lies and manipulation he had used to try to ruin me. Once the process began, I could see how much it affected him. Ethan struggled to maintain the lifestyle he had always flaunted. The loans, investments, and business responsibilities he had ignored or mismanaged now weighed heavily on him. People started noticing his stress, the forced smiles, and the tension in every meeting. His arrogance, which had once made him seem untouchable, now seemed fragile and hollow. Watching him face the consequences of his own choices was a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. Even as I gained control, I couldn't ignore the bittersweet feelings. It felt good to see justice served, to see him no longer in a position to manipulate and hurt me. At the same time, part of me still remembered the pain, the sleepless nights, and the heartbreak he caused. I didn't gloat, I didn't humiliate him publicly, and I didn't stoop to the petty cruelty he might have expected. Instead, I let the law and the careful preparation I had done speak for me. That restraint made the victory feel cleaner, more deserved. As I reflected on everything, I realized how much I had learned from the experience. Betrayal cuts deep, and the damage it causes isn't just financial or social. It hits you emotionally, shaking your trust in people you care about. But I also learned that patience and intelligence can overcome even the most manipulative people. By staying calm, observing carefully, and planning strategically, I turned a situation that could have destroyed me into one where I regained my power and my dignity. I thought about how easy it would have been to act rashly, to lash out in anger, or try to hurt him the way he hurt me. That path might have felt satisfying in the short term, but it wouldn't have solved anything. The real victory came from staying true to myself, from using the resources I had wisely, and from letting consequences fall naturally on the person who deserved them. In the end, Ethan had to face reality. He couldn't rely on lies, manipulation, or charm anymore. And I, for the first time in months, felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about triumphing over someone else. It was about reclaiming my life, my name, and my peace of mind. Patience, careful planning, and staying true to my values had turned the tables completely. And though the scars of betrayal remained, I finally felt like I had come out stronger on the other side. After everything was settled, I finally felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. Ethan was no longer a threat to my life, my reputation, or my happiness. The weight of his lies and manipulation had been lifted, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe without the constant tension of wondering what he was saying or doing behind my back. I had regained control, and it felt incredible. With that control came the freedom to focus on myself and my future. I began investing in my own goals, putting time and energy into projects I had always wanted to pursue, but had put aside while dealing with the chaos Ethan caused. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my reputation, showing people who I really was, hardworking, intelligent, and trustworthy. Each small success reminded me that I was stronger than I had realized, and that the damage he tried to do couldn't define me. Lily and Tom were there every step of the way, celebrating even the smallest victories with me. Lily's encouragement never wavered, and Tom's pride in me was clear in every conversation we had. Their support had been my anchor throughout the ordeal, and now we could finally enjoy the results together. Seeing their smiles and knowing that they believed in me as much as I believed in myself made the journey feel complete. Even though the past had been painful, I could finally look back on it and understand the lessons it had taught me. Betrayal is deeply hurtful, but it also reveals your own strength and resilience. I had learned that patience and intelligence are far more powerful than anger and rash decisions. By staying calm, planning carefully, and acting with purpose, I had turned a situation that could have destroyed me into one where I came out stronger and wiser. The final step was embracing the reality that I had reclaimed my life. Ethan's influence no longer mattered. I was free to make my own decisions, to pursue my dreams, and to protect my own interests without fear. And in a small but meaningful way, the irony of the situation was satisfying. The man who tried to ruin me was now under the influence of the very person he had tried to destroy. He tried to ruin my name. But now, I hold the power. And yes, I'm the one writing his checks on my own terms. Saying it aloud felt like closing a chapter that had haunted me for too long. I wasn't boasting, just acknowledging the justice I had earned through patience, intelligence, and perseverance. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control, rebuilding a life, and proving to myself that no one can define me but me. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and manipulation, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. The journey had been painful, but the victory, quiet, lawful, and complete, was entirely mine. And now, finally, I could move forward, free from the shadow of someone who had once tried to control everything about me.